Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story, and tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
Scorpius Malfoy had always known that his father carried within himself a burden heavier than any physical load. At 35, he had seen enough human souls to distinguish between different kinds of pain, but Draco Malfoy's pain was special. It had the taste of incompleteness, of unresolved questions that had tormented the man for decades. On this rainy November evening, Scorpius sat in the great library of Malfoy Manor, trying to concentrate on his report about the behavior of Cornish pixies in captivity, when he heard familiar footsteps in the corridor. Slow, heavy steps of a man carrying a load invisible to foreign eyes. Draco entered the library without noticing his son, who sat in a cozy corner by the fireplace. 58 years had left marks on the man's face, not so much of time as of inner struggle. His gray hair, once platinum and shining, now seemed dull. His gray eyes, which had once blazed with cold arrogance, were now filled with melancholy. Father approached the great window overlooking the garden, where autumn rain beat against the glass in tiny droplets. Scorpius saw how Draco's shoulders tensed, how his hands clenched by the window. And then, thinking he was alone, Draco spoke quietly. What if everything had turned out differently? What if I had made another choice? These words, spoken almost in a whisper, pierced Scorpius's heart more sharply than any screams. He saw how his father tormented himself with memories of his school life, of decisions he had been forced to make during the war, of the path that had led him to this present moment. Draco often told his son about his years at Hogwarts, but these stories were always filled with regret. Regret for friendship he had lost through pride. Regret for words that could not be taken back. Regret for actions that had defined his future. If only the hat had sent me to Gryffindor. Draco continued, his voice barely audible through the sound of rain. Perhaps then. He didn't finish the sentence, but Scorpius understood. Perhaps then Father wouldn't have been forced to bear the dark mark. Perhaps he wouldn't have had to do things that still made his heart clench at the memory. Perhaps the war would have passed by him, not through him. Scorpius knew that his father had never told him the whole truth about those terrible years. He knew about Grandfather Lucius's participation in the ranks of Death Eaters, about how Malfoy Manor had become the Dark Lord's headquarters. But most of all, he knew about the price his father had paid for his survival and for choosing the right side at the last moment. When Draco finally left, leaving Scorpius alone with his thoughts, the young man sat for a long time in the darkness, pondering the words he had heard. That pain in his father's voice, that desperate desire to rewrite the past. This had to be stopped somehow. The next morning, Scorpius decided to act. He knew only one person who could help with such a fantastic and strange question as peering into alternative realities. Luna Lovegood, now Luna Scamander, had always been a source of the most impossible ideas, which strangely turned out to be true. He found her in her cozy house near the Ottery St. Catchpole Magical Creature Sanctuary, where she lived with her husband Rolf. Luna greeted him with the same dreamy smile that hadn't changed over all these years. "Scorpius," she exclaimed, letting him into the house filled with unusual artifacts and illustrations of strange creatures. "I knew you would come. The Nargles told me yesterday evening." "Nargles?" Scorpius smiled warmly. "Some things never changed. They always swarm around people who are looking for answers to impossible questions," Luna explained, brewing tea that smelled of pears and something indefinably magical. "And you, my dear, are looking for a way to peek into what could have been, aren't you?" Scorpius stared at her in amazement. Even after so many years, Luna's intuition continued to amaze him. "How do you?" "Your eyes," she said simply. "They're the same as your father's when he was younger. Full of questions about paths that weren't taken." She sat opposite him, holding her cup in her hands, and her silvery eyes became more serious. "Tell me what troubles your heart." Scorpius told her about his father, about the pain he carried within himself, about the endless questions of what if. Luna listened attentively, occasionally nodding her head. "You know," she said when he finished, "there is a creature that can show alternative realities. It's called a Visispods. The name comes from ancient Welsh, meaning one who sees what is and what could be. This is another one of your..." Scorpius began, but Luna raised her hand. "I know what you're thinking. that this is another delusion of the love goods. But think, how many of our delusions have turned out to be untrue? A familiar gleam appeared in her eyes. Nargles exist, though they can't be caught. The crumple-horned snorkack was found, though it was considered fiction. And the resurrection stone turned out to be real, though few believed in it. Scorpius was forced to acknowledge the truth of her words. Where can one find this? Visispods. In Romania, Luna replied, getting up and approaching the bookshelf. In the Carpathian Mountains, there's an old cave that locals call the Cave of Reflections. The Visispods has lived there for hundreds of years, appearing only to those who truly need answers. She took an old book in a tattered binding from the shelf and opened it to a page with a hand-drawn map. The cave opens only during new moons, Luna continued, running her finger along the map, and only to those who bring the right gift. What gift? Asked Scorpius, leaning closer to the map. Something sweet and innocent. Something that reminds one of childhood and simplicity. Luna smiled. My father said that Bertie Bott's every flavor beans work best, especially flavors that remind one of home. Scorpius carefully studied the map, memorizing every detail. The cave was located high in the mountains, in a place that was difficult to reach even with magic. Luna, he said, lifting his gaze from the map, how will I be able to ask the right question? How can I make sure the Visispods shows me exactly what I need? The question must come from the heart, she replied, and it must be specific. Not just what if everything had been different, but a precise question about a specific event or decision. Scorpius nodded. He knew exactly what question he wanted to ask. There's one more thing, Luna added, her voice becoming more serious. What you see may change your understanding of many things. Alternative realities sometimes show us truths we're not ready to accept. I'm ready, Scorpius said firmly. 2 days later, he was already standing at the foot of the Carpathian Mountains, holding in his pocket a packet of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans that he had bought in Diagon Alley. The new moon was setting beyond the horizon, plunging the forests into pre-winter darkness. The climb to the cave proved harder than he had expected. Even magic couldn't fully compensate for the steepness of the slopes and the instability of the stones underfoot. Every time he stopped to rest, Scorpius thought about his father, about that pain in his eyes when he looked out the library window. The cave was located well above the tree line, where the air was thin and cold. At first, Scorpius thought he had lost his way. Before him was only a smooth cliff without the slightest hint of an entrance. But then he remembered Luna's words about the new moon and concentrated on his desire to find answers. Slowly, as if from mist, the outline of doors began to appear on the cliff. Not just a crack or opening, but real doors of dark stone, covered with strange symbols that seemed to move in the starlight. Near the doors, he noticed a small stone altar, no bigger than a palm. Scorpius took out the packet of sweets, but then hesitated. Which exact flavors had Luna called best? Those that reminded one of home. He sifted the sweets through his fingers until he found what he was looking for, a bean with vanilla cream flavor, like the homemade biscuits his mother used to make when he was small. Carefully placing the sweet on the altar, he stepped back. The altar flared with soft golden light, and the doors slowly opened. Inside the cave, it was much warmer than outside. The walls glowed with a bluish radiance that didn't require additional lighting. The floor was smooth, as if polished by centuries of travelers' feet who had come here seeking answers. In the depths of the cave, where the walls expanded to form a natural hall, Scorpius saw it. The Visispods was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The creature resembled a chimeric mixture of dragon and phoenix, but seemed to be made of living silver. Its body shimmered and shifted, constantly changing form between reality and reflection. Its eyes, large and wise, were like mirrors in which were reflected not the things around them, but possibilities that existed beyond the ordinary world. Who seeks what could have been? The creature's voice sounded not aloud, but directly in Scorpius's head, melodious and ancient. I, Scorpius Malfoy, he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. I seek an answer for my father. Your father must seek his own answers, the Visispods gently observed. But a child who loves his father may see what will help him find peace. The creature floated closer, and Scorpius felt the air around him become thicker, filled with magic and possibilities. Ask your question, son of Draco. But remember, what you see will forever change your understanding of what is right and wrong, possible and impossible. Scorpius took a deep breath. He had thought about this question all the way here, polishing every word. What if my father, Draco Malfoy, had been sent to Gryffindor by the Sorting Hat instead of Slytherin? The Visispod's eyes flared with brighter silver, and the air in the cave began to vibrate with magical energy. An interesting question, the creature whispered. A question about choice, fate, and the price of decisions. Are you ready to see the world where your father took a different path? Ready. The Visispod spread its wings, which seemed woven from moonlight and stardust. The cave began to dissolve around Scorpius, changing into something else. The last thing he heard was the creature's voice. Remember, child, you are only an observer in this world. Do not interfere with what you see, for even the smallest interference can have unpredictable consequences. And then the world around him completely changed. Scorpius found himself in the Great Hall, which he recognized as the Great Hall of Hogwarts, but not as he remembered it from his father's stories or from his own visits to the school. This hall was filled with an atmosphere of celebration and anticipation. Banners of the 4 houses hung on the walls, and in the center stood a great golden cup blazing with blue flame. The Triwizard Tournament. Scorpius remembered these stories, how his father had told about 4th year, when delegations from Durmstrang and Beauxbatons had come to Hogwarts. But in those stories, Draco had always been on Slytherin's side, had always supported Victor Crumb, had always argued with Harry Potter. And now, when Scorpius looked at the house tables, he saw something impossible. At the Gryffindor table, between Seamus Finnegan and Dean Thomas, sat his father, 14-year-old Draco Malfoy in red and gold robes, with a Gryffindor badge on his chest. His platinum hair was the same shining, his gray eyes the same intelligent, but they lacked that cold arrogance that Scorpius knew so well from photographs of his young Slytherin father. This Draco looked, not happier, but somehow more open, less tense. His face didn't have that mask of perfection that Malfoy's had worn for centuries. But what surprised Scorpius most was something else. At the Slytherin table, where in the real world his father had sat, there was an empty place. And a few seats away, where Draco's friends usually sat, Crabbe and Goyle were talking with someone Scorpius couldn't see clearly. Students. Professor Dumbledore's voice rang through the hall, drawing everyone's attention. Tonight is the evening of a great event. The Goblet of Fire has chosen 3 champions who will represent their schools in the Triwizard Tournament. Scorpius watched as his Gryffindor father listened to the headmaster. Unlike the real Draco, who had always looked at Dumbledore with suspicion and undisguised hostility, this Draco listened with attention and respect. From Durmstrang, Victor Crumb, Dumbledore announced, and the hall exploded with applause. At the Slytherin table, the applause was especially loud, and Scorpius noticed how Draco the Gryffindor also clapped his hands, though restrainedly. From Beauxbatons, Fleur Delacour, again applause, and again Draco joined in. And from Hogwarts, Dumbledore paused, holding the 3rd piece of parchment in his hands. Cedric Diggory. The Hufflepuff table exploded with joy. Cedric stood up, blushing from boldness and excitement, and headed to the side chamber where the other champions were waiting for him. But just then something unexpected happened. The Goblet of Fire flared again, ejecting a 4th piece of parchment. Harry Potter, Dumbledore read, and his voice sounded with undisguised amazement. The great hall froze in silence. Then it exploded with a buzz of voices, exclamations of indignation and amazement. Scorpius saw how Harry Potter sat at the Gryffindor table, white as a sheet, obviously just as shocked as everyone else. And then Scorpius saw what made his heart skip a beat. Draco the Gryffindor didn't shout with indignation, as the Slytherin Draco had done in the real world. Instead, he turned to Harry with an expression of genuine concern on his face. "Harry," Scorpius heard his father quietly address the boy who lived, "did you really not submit your name?" "No," Harry replied, his green eyes wide with shock. "I swear, Draco, I don't know how." Draco. Harry was calling his father simply Draco, without a surname, without formality. This meant friendship? At least trust. "I believe you," Draco said, and there wasn't the slightest doubt in his voice. "Someone else did this. The question is just who and why." Scorpius watched as this alternative version of his father supported Harry at a moment when half the school looked at him with suspicion and envy. In the real world, Draco would have been one of the loudest critics, perhaps even creating those Potter Stinks badges. But here, in this alternative world, Draco Malfoy was Harry Potter's friend. The scene began to blur, and Scorpius felt the Visispods carrying him further in time, deeper into this alternative reality, where everything he knew about his father was turned upside down. "Watch and learn," the creature's voice whispered in his head. "Watch what price each choice carries, and how one moment can change an entire life. Scorpius felt time accelerating around him, days rushing past like pages of a book turned by an invisible hand. The Visispods carried him through weeks of alternative reality, stopping at the most important moments that shaped the fate of his Gryffindor father. The first stop, Gryffindor dormitory, November of 4th year. Scorpius found himself in the familiar circular room beneath the roof of Gryffindor Tower, where red and gold curtains around the beds swayed in the evening wind. The atmosphere here was heavy, filled with mistrust and hidden hostility. Draco sat on the edge of his bed, holding a letter from his parents. Even from a distance, Scorpius could read his mother's familiar handwriting, elegant flourishes that betrayed aristocratic upbringing. But the way his father's fingers trembled around the parchment spoke of words that were merciless. Received another letter about what a disgrace you are to the family, Malfoy. Ron Weasley's voice was full of poorly concealed malicious pleasure. Scorpius winced at the cruelty of the tone. In this world, the hostility between Ron and Draco was even more toxic because of their proximity. They slept in the same room, forced to face each other daily. Ron, Harry intervened, but his voice sounded tired, as if this conflict repeated again and again. Perhaps enough? Perhaps enough of what? Ron snapped back. Pretending I don't know who his father is? Forgetting that his family terrorized my relatives for years? Draco raised his head, and Scorpius saw in his father's gray eyes not anger, but deep fatigue. Fatigue from constant defense, from the necessity of proving his loyalty daily to people who would never truly trust him. I don't choose my family, Weasley, Draco said quietly, but steel could be heard in his voice. Just as I don't choose to constantly listen to your reminders about it. But you can choose who to become, Seamus Finnegan interjected. And so far you're choosing to defend Potter simply because it gives you some advantages. What advantages? Draco stood up from the bed, and something dangerous appeared in his posture, something that reminded of aristocratic upbringing and centuries of ruling blood. Being an outcast in my own house? Receiving letters from parents where they disown me? Listening to daily suspicions and accusations? Getting protection from the most famous wizard of our time, Ron coldly replied. Perhaps your family is counting on. My family, Draco interrupted him, and notes of that threatening calm for which Malfoys were famous appeared in his voice, has considered me dead for months now, so stop using that as a weapon. Seamus whistled. Seriously? They really disowned me after first year, Draco confirmed. When it became clear I wasn't going to spy on Potter and pass information to Father. Scorpius felt pain in his chest. Even in this alternative world, where Draco had made the right choice, he had paid for it by losing his family. Then why do you still defend Harry? Dean Thomas asked quietly. If it's not for family. Draco turned to Harry, and Scorpius saw in his eyes something complex. A mixture of duty, guilt, and something else that even Draco himself didn't seem to fully understand. Because, he said slowly, sometimes doing the right thing is the only way to live with yourself. Harry looked at him with an expression Scorpius couldn't fully decipher. There was gratitude there, but also discomfort, as if Harry wasn't sure he wanted such protection. Draco, Harry began carefully, you're not obligated to. I know, Draco replied sharply. Potter, I'm not doing this for you personally. I'm doing this because it's right. The coldness in his tone made everyone present tense. Scorpius understood. In this world, the relationship between his father and Harry was complicated, built on principles rather than genuine affection. Fine, Harry said, and tension appeared in his voice too. Good to know where we stand. When Draco left for the shower, taking his things from the nightstand, an uncomfortable silence fell over the dormitory. He's strange, Neville Longbottom said quietly, like he's constantly fighting with himself. Perhaps that's good, Ron muttered. At least then we know he's not planning to stab us in the back. Harry sat on his bed, staring at the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. Sometimes I think he hates himself more than we ever hated him. The scene blurred, and time accelerated again. The next stop, a corridor near the Great Hall, the day before the first task of the tournament. Scorpius found himself by the window where Draco stood alone, looking at the preparations for tomorrow's competition. His face was tense, but not from excitement for a friend, rather from internal struggle. Draco. The voice made the boy turn around. Pansy Parkinson was approaching him, accompanied by several older Slytherins. Her face expressed cold disappointment. Pansy, Draco nodded restrainedly. We've come to talk to you for the last time, she said without preamble. as an old friend. Behind her stood Blaise Zabini, Millicent Bulstrode, and Marcus Flint. They all looked at Draco like someone who had deeply disappointed them. "The whole school knows that tomorrow Potter might die," Pansy continued. "And you're the only Gryffindor who doesn't look thrilled by this prospect." "Because I'm not a psychopath," Draco replied coldly. "Because you've forgotten who you are," Flint interjected. "Malfoy, your father is one of the most influential people in the wizarding world. Your family has been at the forefront of pure-blood aristocracy for centuries, and you're defending a boy who embodies everything we fight against." "We?" Draco raised an eyebrow with that arrogance that was in Malfoy blood. "I don't remember giving you permission to speak on my behalf, Flint." Marcus blushed, but Pansy signaled him to be quiet. "Draco," she said more softly, "we grew up together. I've known you since childhood. The boy I remember would never have put principles above family and true friends." "Perhaps that boy wasn't as good as you thought," Draco replied, repeating words he had spoken before. "Or perhaps this boy is just trying to please the wrong people," Blaise said quietly. The words from his childhood friend affected Draco more than all the others. Scorpius saw how his father's shoulders shuddered. "What do you mean?" "I mean the Gryffindors don't accept you," Blaise said directly. "Weasley hates you openly. Longbottom fears you. Thomas doesn't trust you. Even Potter. Draco, even Potter treats you like an obligation, not like a friend." These words hit their target. Scorpius saw how his father's facial expression hardened. "You're wrong." "Really?" Pansy took a step forward. "When did Potter last spend time with you not because you were helping him? When did he last invite you to simply sit with him and his real friends?" Draco was silent, and this silence was more eloquent than any words. "Come home, Draco," Pansy said quietly. "Come back to people who truly value you. Your mother still hopes. Your father still left the door open." "At what price?" Draco asked hoarsely. "At the price of stopping this nonsense with Potter," Flint replied. "At the price of returning to true values." "To hatred, you mean?" "To order," Blaise corrected. "To understanding that pure-blood wizards have duties to their society." Draco looked at his former friends for a long time, and Scorpius saw internal struggle in his eyes. The temptation was real, to return to people who had known him since childhood, to the simplicity of clear rules and expectations. "No," he finally said quietly. "What?" "I said no. I won't return." Pansy looked at him with pain that was almost physically palpable. "Then this is the end, Draco. We can't continue pretending we don't see who you've become." "I understand," Draco replied, and his voice was empty. When the Slytherins left, Draco remained alone by the window. Scorpius saw how his shoulders trembled, not from cold, but from the realization that he had just finally burned bridges with his past. "Difficult, isn't it?" The voice made Draco turn around. Hermione Granger stood nearby, her intelligent brown eyes full of compassion, but not pity. "Granger," Draco said wearily. "Eavesdropping?" "Not intentionally. Just walking by," she approached. "But heard enough." "And what did you hear?" "How you choose the difficult path instead of the easy one." Again, Hermione stood beside him by the window, looking at the same landscape. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I also know what it's like to be between two worlds. In the Muggle world, I was always too strange. In the magical world, always not pure blood enough." "It's not the same," Draco replied. "Perhaps not, but loneliness feels the same." They were silent for several minutes, each thinking their own thoughts. "Granger," Draco finally said, "why do you always try to talk to me? Your friends, especially Weasley, don't approve." Hermione turned her head, studying his face. "Because," she said simply, "I believe people can change. And because I think you already have, even if you don't see it yourself." "I haven't changed," Draco protested. "I'm just doing what I must." "Isn't that the same thing?" Draco didn't answer, but Scorpius saw that Hermione's words made him think. "Tomorrow Harry will be in danger," Hermione said quietly. "And despite all the complexity of your relationship, I know you'll worry about him." "I would worry about anyone in such a situation. Perhaps. But about him, especially." Time began to accelerate again, and Scorpius found himself in the stands on the day of the first task. Draco sat apart from everyone, his face pale and tense. When Harry entered the arena, Draco involuntarily leaned forward. The entire time Harry fought the dragon, Draco sat motionless, gripping the edge of the bench. Scorpius saw how his father followed Harry's every move, how his lips moved soundlessly. Probably he was praying or casting luck charms. When the dragon nearly hit Harry with its flame, Draco unconsciously jumped to his feet, as if ready to jump into the arena. Several students turned to him in surprise. "Sit down, Malfoy," someone from the Slytherins shouted. "Don't interfere." But Draco didn't even hear. His attention was completely absorbed by the struggle in the arena. When Harry finally grabbed the golden egg and the task was completed, Draco didn't join the general applause. He simply sat, covering his eyes, slowly releasing held breath. "Your hero survived, Malfoy," the same Slytherin shouted again. "Now you can sleep peacefully." This time Draco turned around, and something dangerous flashed in his gray eyes. "Not," he said quietly, but his voice reached everyone in the vicinity. "One more word, and you'll find out why I was almost sent to Slytherin." The threat sounded so cold and convincing that Nott fell silent. Even wearing red and gold colors, Draco remained a Malfoy, with all the dangerous traits that name implied. When the crowd began to disperse, Scorpius watched Draco go to the castle. His walk was straight and confident, but Scorpius noticed how his hands trembled. In the hospital wing, he found Harry, who was allowing Madame Pomfrey to apply healing charms to his burns. "Potter," Draco said from the doorway. "Malfoy," Harry replied, turning around. His face had a strange expression, not hostile, but not friendly either. Rather tired. "How do you feel?" "Alive," Harry replied shortly. An uncomfortable pause hung between them. Scorpius saw that both boys wanted to say something, but didn't know how. "Good," Draco finally said. "That's good." He turned to leave, but Harry's voice stopped him. "Draco." "What?" "Thank you for worrying." Draco hesitated in the doorway. "I wasn't worried about you personally, Potter. I don't want anyone to die because of a stupid tournament." "Of course," Harry said quietly. "Just principles." "Just principles," Draco confirmed and left. But Scorpius saw the truth in both boys' eyes. There was something more than principles between them, but neither was ready to acknowledge it. Something complex and tangled that couldn't fit into simple categories of friendship or enmity. Time rushed forward again, and Scorpius felt that a moment was approaching when this fragile balance would be disturbed by the appearance of someone who would force everyone to reconsider their ideas about who Draco Malfoy really was. Time accelerated around Scorpius again, carrying him through the cold January days to the moment of the second task of the tournament. He found himself by the Black Lake on a frosty morning when the champions were preparing to dive into the icy waters to rescue their most precious treasures. Draco stood on the stands among the Gryffindors, but even here he looked isolated. Ron demonstratively avoided looking in his direction, and most other housemates kept their distance. Only Hermione occasionally cast sympathetic glances at him. When Harry disappeared under the water, Scorpius saw how his father's shoulders tensed. Despite all the complexity of their relationship, Draco couldn't help but worry about the only person in the school who at least partially understood him. "An hour underwater," Draco muttered to himself. "In February, mad organizers. Worried about Potter Malfoy?" The voice made Draco turn sharply. Behind him stood himself. An exact copy, but in Slytherin colors, with that cold arrogance in his eyes that Scorpius recognized from photographs of his real father from school years. "What? Who are you?" Draco involuntarily stepped back. "I am who you should have been," the newcomer replied with a contemptuous smile. "The real Draco Malfoy." Around them, students began to turn, noticing the unusual scene. Whispers spread through the stands like wildfire. "Two Malfoys. How is this possible? Someone's using Polyjuice potion?" The newcomer raised his hand, drawing attention. "Friends," he said loudly enough to be heard in the vicinity, "don't worry. I've simply come to correct a mistake that has gone on far too long." He pointed at the real Draco. "This imposter has been posing as the heir of the Malfoy family for 4 years. But true Malfoys would never disgrace their family with friendship with the boy who lived." "Shut up," the real Draco said quietly but sharply. "I don't know who you are, but—" "I am the one who remembers honor," the double interrupted. "The one who hasn't forgotten what it means to bear the name Malfoy." Scorpius saw how these words struck his father. They touched the most painful spot, his constant doubts about the correctness of his own choice. "Look at him," the double continued, addressing the crowd. "He stands among Gryffindors, but even they don't trust him. He has renounced the Slytherins, but found no acceptance among the red and gold." The words were cruel, but true. Scorpius saw how the real Draco clenched his fists. "What do you want?" he asked through gritted teeth. "To return you to where you belong," the double replied. "To Slytherin. To your true family." Slytherin doesn't want me back, Draco said bitterly. After 4th year, Slytherin is ready to forgive a lost child, the double interrupted. If that child is ready to acknowledge their mistakes. Voices began to ring out from the crowd. How strange. This must be magic. But which one is real? The double smiled, coldly and calculatedly. An interesting question. Let's find out. If the real Draco Malfoy had to choose between Potter and his family's honor, what would he choose? I would choose what's right, the real Draco replied. And I would choose what's worthy of the Malfoy name, the double said. Which, in my opinion, proves who is real. The crowd buzzed louder. Some students began to voice opinions. The one in Slytherin colors really does look more like a Malfoy. But Draco has been in Gryffindor for 4 years. Maybe it was a long-term plan? Spying on Potter? The real Draco turned to the crowd with pain in his eyes. Do you really believe this? After everything I've done? After I defended? After you masterfully played your role? The double interrupted. One must admit, it was a brilliant plan. Infiltrate the enemy's trust, gather information. I never spied, the real Draco exploded. Of course not, the double theatrically rolled his eyes. You just happened to end up next to the most important figure in the wizarding world. Pure coincidence. Scorpius watched as the discussion poisoned the atmosphere around his father. Even those Gryffindors who had begun to trust him now looked with new suspicions. Maybe he really... Someone began. It always seemed strange that Malfoy suddenly changed. What if it was all a plan? Hermione suddenly stood up from her seat. Enough! Her voice cut through the noise. Have you all gone mad? She descended closer to the 2 Dracos. Hermione, don't interfere, the real Draco said quietly. This isn't your business. It is my business, she said firmly. Because I know the real Draco Malfoy. And you are you. The double laughed. How touching. The mudblood defends her little spy. The word mudblood sounded with such hatred that even some Slytherins winced. The real Draco immediately tensed. Don't you dare address her that way, he said coldly. Why not? The double tilted his head with interest. Isn't that what she is? A muggle's child who contaminates our sacred halls. She's the brightest witch of her generation, the real Draco replied, and a better wizard than most purebloods. These words caused even more buzz from the crowd. Many had never heard Draco so openly defend Hermione. The double wrinkled with disgust. See, he addressed the crowd. This cannot be the real Malfoy. A true heir to our family would never demean himself to defend a mudblood. A true Malfoy would defend those who deserve it, the real Draco replied, regardless of their blood status. Hermione listened carefully to this exchange, her intelligent eyes moving between the 2 identical figures. Suddenly, an expression of understanding appeared on her face. Interesting, she said quietly. Tell me, she addressed the double, do you remember what happened in 2nd year when the basilisk attacked Muggle-born students? The double hesitated for a moment. Of course. Glorious days of the heir of Slytherin's return. And what did you feel when you learned that I had also suffered? Satisfaction, the double replied without hesitation. One less mudblood. The real Draco paled. I never thought that way, he whispered. Even then in 2nd year when I said terrible things, inside I was afraid. Afraid you might die. Hermione nodded, her eyes shining with understanding. That's exactly what I wanted to hear, she said. The real Draco always fought with himself. Even when he said horrible things, there was something else in his eyes. She turned to the double. But you say these things without internal conflict. Without pain. As if they're just words. They're just words, the double snapped. Words of truth. No, Hermione shook her head. For the real Draco, these words were always painful. Even when he spoke them, part of his soul screamed. Scorpius saw how these words struck the real Draco. Hermione saw in him what he often denied himself, the internal struggle between upbringing and conscience. You're wrong, the double said, but uncertainty appeared in his voice. No, now the real Draco spoke, his voice becoming stronger. She's right. I always fought. Every cruel word, every meanness, it all tore me apart inside. He looked at Hermione gratefully. Thank you, he said quietly, for seeing what I didn't want to acknowledge myself. The double stepped back, his mask of confidence beginning to crack. This is impossible, he muttered. A real Malfoy cannot. A real Malfoy can doubt, the real Draco interrupted. Can fight their upbringing. Can change. From the lake came sounds. The champions were beginning to emerge on the surface. Harry surfaced among the last, holding an unconscious Ron and a small girl. When the crowd's attention switched to the completion of the task, the double took advantage of the moment. "This isn't over," he hissed to the real Draco. "I won't let you destroy everything the Malfoys stood for." "And what exactly is that?" Draco asked. "Hatred? Arrogance? Belief that blood makes us better than others. Order," the double replied. "Tradition. Understanding one's place in the world." "My place in the world is where I can do good," the real Draco said firmly. "Not where I was placed by the accident of birth." The double looked around the crowd once more, noticed that most students now leaned towards thinking the real one was the one in Gryffindor colors. His plan hadn't worked. "We'll meet again," he promised, and suddenly dissolved into air like mist scattered by wind. Not apparat, simply vanished, leaving behind only a light smell of ozone and metal. Hermione approached Draco. "Are you all right?" "No," he answered honestly. "But I will be. Thank you, Hermione, for believing in me." "I didn't just believe," she said. "I knew. Real people always doubt themselves. Only imitations are confident in their perfection." The crowd gradually dispersed, discussing not only the results of the task, but also the strange appearance of the second Draco. Many were still confused, but most began to lean towards thinking the real one was the one they had known for 4 years. "Draco," Neville Longbottom approached, looking uncomfortable. I should apologize." "For doubting." "No need," Draco replied. "You had every reason to doubt. My family gave you plenty of reasons not to trust anyone named Malfoy." "But you're not your family," Neville said. "I understand that now." Gradually, other Gryffindors approached Draco. Not all were ready to fully trust, but something had changed. The double's appearance, paradoxically, had helped clarify who the real Draco was. Only Ron remained cold. "Nice performance," he said, passing by. "But I haven't forgotten who your father is." Draco didn't respond, but Scorpius saw the pain in his eyes. Some wounds never heal completely. That evening in the Great Hall, conversations revolved around 2 events of the day: the completion of the second task and the mysterious appearance of the second Draco. The professors looked concerned, often whispering among themselves. "Who could it have been?" someone from Ravenclaw asked. "Maybe someone from the family," a Hufflepuff suggested. "Or someone using very complex transformation," an older student added. Draco sat at the Gryffindor table, but still separate from the main group. Hermione sat next to him. "Do you think he'll return?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Draco answered without hesitation. "Whoever he is, he won't give up so easily." "What do you think about him?" Draco was silent for a long time, stirring food on his plate. "I think," he finally said, "he embodies everything I fear in myself. The part of me that still believes what I was told from childhood." "But you fight that part." "Every day," Draco confirmed. "And sometimes I lose." Hermione placed her hand on his shoulder. "The struggle is what matters most. Not victory, but the struggle itself." That same evening, when most students had gone to their dormitories, Draco remained in the Gryffindor common room, looking into the fire. Scorpius saw how many thoughts swarmed in his father's head. A figure appeared by the stairs. Harry was coming down, still damp after a long bath in the hospital wing. "Can't sleep?" he asked, sitting in the neighboring armchair. "No," Draco replied. "Too many thoughts." "About that other you?" "Among other things." They sat in silence, watching the flames. "Draco," Harry finally said, "I want you to know what Hermione said today, about you always fighting. I noticed that, even in the early years when we were enemies." Draco looked at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" "There were moments when you said something cruel, but your eyes said something else. As if you hated yourself for those words." "Maybe because I really did hate myself," Draco said quietly. "Because your conscience was always stronger than your upbringing," Harry said. And today everyone saw that. This was the closest moment to real understanding between them in all 4 years. Not friendship, not yet friendship, but recognition that there could be something more between them than mutual tolerance. "Harry," Draco said, using his first name for the first time, "thank you." "For what?" "For giving me a chance to prove I can be better than my family." Harry nodded. "You proved that long ago, Draco. Not everyone is ready to acknowledge it." When they went to their rooms, Scorpius felt that the Visispods was preparing to carry him to the final moments of this alternative reality, to the moment when the Double's mystery would be revealed, and Draco Malfoy would finally find his true place in a world where everything had gone differently. The weeks following the double's appearance passed in tense anticipation. Scorpius watched as time accelerated, showing him fragments of his father's life in this alternative world. Draco tried to return to the usual rhythm of study, but the atmosphere in the school had changed. Students constantly looked over their shoulders, expecting a new appearance of the mysterious double. Hermione spent hours in the library, rereading books about magical transformations, Polyjuice potion, and other ways of changing appearance. Draco often joined her, grateful that at least one person completely believed in him. "This can't be Polyjuice potion," Hermione said, turning pages of most complex magical transformations. Too precise a likeness, even in the smallest details. Polyjuice copies appearance, but not manner of movement, not gestures. "And he moved exactly like me," Draco confirmed gloomily. "Even better than me. As if he knew me better than I know myself." Spring slowly entered its rites, and the third, final task of the tournament was approaching. A huge labyrinth grew on the Quidditch pitch, its dark green walls rising higher each day. It was on the evening when they were to announce the date of the final task that the double appeared again. Draco and Hermione were returning from the library when they saw him in one of the empty castle corridors. He stood by a window, looking at the labyrinth growing on the field. "You came," the double said without turning around. "I knew you would come. What do you want?" Draco asked, instinctively stepping in front of Hermione. "To talk," the double finally turned around. "Alone. Without the mudblood." "Hermione stays," Draco said firmly. "Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of her." The double sighed with theatrical disappointment. "How far you've fallen, boy. Once Malfoys spoke only with their equals." "Hermione is my equal," Draco replied. "More than that, she's better than me." "Better?" The double laughed with disgust. "A muggle's child better than the heir of one of the oldest pureblood families?" "Yes," Draco answered without hesitation. "She's smarter, kinder, braver. She deserves respect more than any of us who were simply born with the right blood." Hermione involuntarily touched his hand, a gesture of gratitude and support. The double watched this interaction with an expression of physical nausea. "Looking at you, I can't believe you bear the name Malfoy," he said quietly. "Our ancestors are turning in their graves." "Our ancestors were monsters," Draco replied. "If they're turning, then good. It means I'm doing something right." "Monsters?" The double's voice became dangerously quiet. Abraxas Malfoy was one of the most influential wizards of his time. Septimus Malfoy served in the ministry and protected our traditions. Armando Malfoy kept house elves as slaves and considered muggles animals," Draco interrupted. "Septimus supported laws that forbade muggle-born wizards from holding high positions. Abraxas financed pureblood supremacy movements. They supported order. They supported genocide." The shout echoed through the corridor, reverberating off the stone walls. Hermione felt the air around them tense. The magic of both wizards was reacting to emotions. "Who are you?" she suddenly asked, her intelligent eyes carefully studying the double. "You know the Malfoy family history too well." "Too personally." The double froze, as if she had hit the target. "What do you mean, mudblood?" "Stop calling me that," Draco said sharply, drawing his wand. "Or what?" The double also drew his wand. "You'll attack me? Forgot that I know all your moves." He flicked his wand, and a red beam of light shot from it. A simple stunning spell, but executed with such force that Draco barely managed to dodge. "Protego!" Hermione exclaimed, creating a shield in front of herself and Draco. The curse bounced off the shield and hit the wall, leaving a deep crack in the stone. "Expelliarmus!" Draco tried to disarm his opponent, but the double easily blocked the spell. "Weak nephew," the double said mockingly. "Have the Gryffindors only taught you defensive magic?" He waved his wand, and the floor beneath Draco and Hermione's feet began to crack, forcing them to scatter in different directions. "Concoro!" Hermione shouted, trying to bind the enemy, but he dispersed her spell with a contemptuous gesture. "Child's play," the double laughed. "Let me show you real magic." He spoke something in Latin, and the air around him began to shimmer. Suddenly dozens of small but deadly dangerous curses flew from his wand. They swarmed in the air like angry bees. "Draco down!" Hermione shouted, and they both pressed themselves to the floor. The curses whistled over their heads, embedding themselves in the walls and leaving smoking holes behind. "Incendio!" Draco directed a stream of flame at the double, but he created a water shield with one hand, continuing to attack with the other. The battle raged throughout the corridor. Hermione used transfiguration, turning stone blocks into temporary cover, while Draco tried to get close enough to deliver a decisive blow. "Defendo!" the double suddenly shouted, and Draco barely managed to roll aside. The severing charm cut through the air where he had just stood, leaving a deep scar on the stone floor. "Dark magic?" Draco asked, breathing heavily. "I know much more than you think," the double replied, preparing for a new attack. But Hermione took advantage of his distraction. "Petrificus totalis." Her spell hit the target, but the double managed to partially block it. He froze for only a moment, but that was enough. "Expelliarmus maxima." Draco put all his strength into the spell. The double's wand flew from his hand, but he didn't give up. Instead, he began to whisper something quickly, and dark shimmer appeared around him. "He's preparing to disappear," Hermione shouted. "Incarcerus!" Draco exclaimed, trying to bind him with ropes, but the double had already begun to dissolve. "Silencio! Petrificus! Stupefy!" Hermione released a volley of spells simultaneously. One of them, the silencing charm, hit the target just as the double was trying to complete his escape. He became solid again, unable to finish the vanishing spell. "Now!" Hermione shouted. She quickly spoke a complex incantation, and the double suddenly froze in place, surrounded by golden threads of light. "What is it?" Draco asked. "A truth revelation charm," Hermione explained. "It doesn't force you to tell the truth, but it doesn't allow maintaining magical transformations under stress." And indeed, the double's appearance began to change. He remained similar to Draco, but was aging. His facial features became sharper, crueler. His hair darkened. The same cold hatred appeared in his eyes, but deepened by years of fanaticism. "Cassius," Draco whispered, recognizing features familiar from family portraits. "Cassius Malfoy." "Your great-uncle," Hermione nodded. "The one who disappeared during the First War with Voldemort." Cassius struggled with the spell, but the golden threads held him firmly. "Yes," he hissed. "Cassius Malfoy, younger brother of your grandfather Abraxas, the one who remembers what it means to be a true Malfoy." "But you were supposed to be dead," Draco said. "Father said." "Your father thought I was dead," Cassius laughed bitterly. "I allowed him to think so. I was hiding, waiting, hoping that Lucius would raise his son properly." His eyes blazed with hatred. "Instead, he raised a traitor. A weakling who disgraces everything our ancestors fought for." "What did they fight for?" Draco asked quietly. "The right to consider themselves better than others? The right to humiliate and destroy? The right to rule?" Cassius exploded. "The magical world needs leadership. Needs those who understand the importance of traditions, order, hierarchy. It needs those who understand the importance of justice," Hermione objected. "Equality. Compassion." Cassius looked at her with such hatred that she involuntarily stepped back. "Compassion is a luxury only the strong can afford," he hissed. "The weak use compassion to destroy the strong." "You're insane," Draco whispered. "Insane?" Cassius laughed. "I'm the only sane one in this family. I see what's happening to the magical world. Traditions are crumbling. Muggle worldview is poisoning our sacred halls." Hermione's spell began to weaken. Cassius was too strong a wizard to hold for long. "You know what's worst?" he continued, struggling with the golden threads. "That you could have been great. You have strength, intelligence, the blood of true leaders. But you wasted it all on friendship with a mudblood and protecting a boy who isn't worth your fingernails." "Harry is worth much more," Draco replied. "He saved the magical world when he was a baby. He risks his life for others every day. He's a symbol of the old order's fall." Cassius screamed, finally breaking the spell. The golden threads scattered like glitter, and Cassius drew his wand again. "If I can't bring you back to the right path, then I'll remove the obstacle," he said coldly. "Avada! Expelliarmus!" Hermione was faster. Cassius's wand flew from his hand, but he didn't surrender. Instead, he laughed, a horrible, insane laugh. "Do you think you've won?" he wheezed. "I'm not the only one who believes in the old order. There are others, many others, and they won't allow someone like you to destroy everything we've built for centuries." "Who?" Draco asked. "Who else?" "You'll see," Cassius promised. "When the magical world burns with war again, when the Dark Lord returns in all his power, then you'll see. You'll see how right I was." The Dark Lord. Scorpius shuddered. Even in this alternative world, Voldemort's shadow still hung over everything. "Voldemort won't return," Hermione said firmly. "Harry will stop him." "Potter?" Cassius laughed again. "A child who survived through lucky accident?" You place your hopes on him. I place my hopes on people who choose good over power, Hermione replied. And I place my hopes on power, Cassius responded. And if my nephew cannot be part of the solution, then he'll become part of the problem. He made a sharp movement with his hand, and the air around him began to shimmer. Until we meet again, nephew, he said, looking at Draco with a mixture of love and hatred. I hope when we see each other again, you'll finally understand your mistakes. He vanished, leaving behind the smell of sulfur and something else, something rotten and disgusting. Draco and Hermione stood in the empty corridor, breathing heavily. He really is mad, Hermione whispered. No, Draco shook his head. That would be easier if he were mad. But he believes what he says. Truly believes. What will we do? Draco was silent for a long time, looking at the place where Cassius had just stood. We'll prepare, he finally said. If he's right about there being others, if a new war really is being prepared, then we'll be ready, Hermione finished. They walked down the corridor side by side, and Scorpius saw that something more than friendship had arisen between them, mutual respect and understanding. People who had gone through danger together were forever bound by special ties. The next day, the whole school buzzed with rumors about what had happened. Draco and Hermione told the professors about the meeting with Cassius, and the atmosphere in the castle became even more tense. Dumbledore called Draco to his office. Mr. Malfoy, the headmaster said when the boy sat in the chair opposite the desk, I'm afraid what happened has serious consequences. What exactly, sir? Cassius Malfoy isn't just a mad relative, Dumbledore explained. He was one of Grindelwald's closest associates in the 40s. After Grindelwald's defeat, he disappeared, and we thought he was dead. Draco paled. He served Grindelwald? Yes. And if he really has returned, if he really is gathering supporters of the old order. Dumbledore paused. This could mean that dark times are returning faster than we expected. What can I do? Dumbledore looked at him for a long time with his blue eyes. Remain yourself, he said finally. Continue making the right choices, even when it's difficult. People like your uncle draw strength from hatred and division. You draw strength from love and unity. But is it enough? Draco asked quietly. Can hatred be defeated simply with love? Not simply with love, Dumbledore replied. With love supported by courage. The courage to fight for what you believe in. The courage to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Draco nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. That evening he sat in the Gryffindor common room, looking into the fire. Harry approached him. Hermione told me what happened, he said, sitting nearby. And what do you think? I think you made the right choice, Harry replied. Even if it was difficult. He's my uncle, Draco said quietly. The only family member still alive besides my parents. And he hates me for who I've become. Family isn't just blood, Harry said. Family is people who accept you as you are, who support your choices, even if they don't always agree with them. Draco looked at him in surprise. Are you talking about Gryffindor? I'm talking about the people surrounding you now, Harry replied. Hermione, who risked everything for you. Neville, who began to trust you. Even me. Even you. Harry nodded. I can't say we're friends in the usual sense of the word. Too much history between us. But I can say I respect you. For your courage. For your willingness to change. These words meant more to Draco than any friendship. Respect was something that had to be earned. And he had earned it. Thank you, he said simply. When Harry left, Draco remained alone with his thoughts. Cassius had been right about one thing. The path Draco had chosen was lonely and difficult. He had lost family, old friends, the simplicity of clear rules and expectations. But in return, he had found something else. Self-respect, knowledge that he was doing the right things, understanding that a true Malfoy's strength lay not in the ability to humiliate others, but in readiness to protect those who needed it. Scorpius felt the scene around him beginning to blur. The Visispods was preparing to show him the final part of this alternative reality, the moment when all lessons would be learned, all choices made, and the fate of this world would be finally decided. But before this, Scorpius saw one more brief moment, Draco writing a letter to his parents. A letter in which he finally explained his choice and prepared for what might become a complete break with everything he had once known. Mother, Father, he wrote, I know I've disappointed you. I know I haven't become who you wanted to raise, but I've become someone I'm proud of. And I hope that someday you'll be able to understand that love for family doesn't mean blind obedience to its traditions. Sometimes the best thing we can do for those we love is to show them a different path. The letter remained unfinished. But the words that were written showed the path this alternative Draco had traveled, from obedient son to a person who thought with his own head and made his own choices. Scorpius felt the scene around him beginning to blur. The Visispods was preparing to show him something else, other possibilities, other paths his father might have taken, so that he could truly understand the value of the choice that had been made in reality. The scene with Draco writing a letter to his parents began to blur around Scorpius, and he felt the Visispods carrying him through time. But this time the direction was different, not forward along the line of this alternative reality, but sideways to other possible worlds. Interesting, son of Draco, the creature's voice resonated in his head. Are you ready to see other paths your father might have taken? Scorpius found himself in darkness, surrounded by shimmering images, fragments of worlds that had never existed, but could have existed. Show me, he whispered. The first image blazed before him with bright red light. Draco Malfoy stood surrounded by Death Eaters, his left arm bare, displaying a fresh, dark mark. His face was cold and cruel, his eyes burning with fanatical devotion. At his feet lay a body, Hermione Granger, her lifeless eyes staring into emptiness. In this world, the Visispods explained, your father never doubted his family's values. He became what Lucius wanted to raise, a perfect Death Eater. The war ended with the Dark Lord's victory. The Muggle world is destroyed, Muggle-born wizards are exterminated or enslaved. Scorpius saw how this alternative Draco smiled, looking at devastated London, where Muggles hid in ruins while pure-blood wizards ruled like gods among mortals. No, Scorpius whispered. This is horrible. The image vanished, replaced by another. Now he saw Draco sitting in a small room resembling a cell. His face was withered by years, his eyes empty and hopeless. On his hands were shackles that blocked magic. And in this world, the Visispods continued, your father tried to change, but it was too late. When he finally understood the horror of his actions, the war was already over. Harry Potter won, but justice was merciless. Draco spent the rest of his life in Azkaban, consumed by remorse for not being able to change earlier. Scorpius saw how this Draco wrote letters that were never sent, begging forgiveness from people who were already dead because of his mistakes. The third image showed something even more painful. Draco lay on a hospital bed, young but dying. Beside him stood Lucius and Narcissa, their faces distorted with grief. At the foot of the bed, Harry Potter weeping. Here your father tried to save Harry during one of the early battles, the creature explained. He died a hero but died young. Never learned what true repentance was, true forgiveness, true love. Enough, Scorpius said, turning away. I've seen enough. But the Visispods showed one more image. An elderly Draco sat in a luxurious office, surrounded by portraits of ancestors. His face expressed deep satisfaction. On the desk lay documents about new laws restricting the rights of Muggle-born wizards. This Draco had never become a Death Eater, but had never changed his views either. He had simply found legal ways of discrimination. In this world there was no open war, the Visispods said, but slow, methodical destruction of freedom proved no less effective. Your father became Minister for Magic and civilizedly returned the world to the Dark Ages. None of these worlds is better, Scorpius whispered. Now compare with what you just saw, the creature said gently. Before Scorpius appeared again the image of Draco the Gryffindor, lonely but not broken, who had lost his family but found himself, who had never become truly happy, but was able to live with a clear conscience. He paid the price for his principles, Scorpius said, but he remained human. Yes, the Visispods confirmed. And now look at your world. A new image showed the real Draco, the one Scorpius knew. A man who had gone through darkness and emerged from it changed. Who had done terrible things but found strength to repent. Who had lost much time but found a way to make amends. Scorpius saw his real father, how he helped young wizards from troubled families, how he funded support programs for war victims, how every evening he read him, Little Scorpius, fairy tales where good always triumphed over evil. Your father in the real world lived through all these alternatives in his soul, the Visispods explained. He was both Death Eater and victim, both hero and villain. But in the end he chose repentance and redemption. Is this the best option? Scorpius asked. This is the only option where your father became a truly whole person, the creature replied. In the Gryffindor world he avoided evil, but never knew the true depth of good. In the real world he knew both, and this made him wiser. The images began to fade, and Scorpius felt the Visispods preparing to send him back. Remember, son of Draco, the creature's voice said, growing distant. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give those we love is to allow them to bear the burden of their past. This burden makes them stronger. The world around Scorpius dissolved in silvery mist. Scorpius awoke in the cave, lying on the cold stone floor. The Visispods had vanished, leaving only a faint shimmer in the air and a sense of completion. He slowly rose, feeling that his worldview had changed forever. What he had seen was simultaneously terrible and enlightening. All those endless variants of his father's fate, all those paths life could have taken. The return to England passed like a fog. Scorpius barely remembered the flight, the journey home, entering Malfoy Manor. His thoughts were filled with images of alternative realities and understanding of what he needed to do. He found his father in the same place where he had left him weeks ago, by the library window, with the same tired look and hunched shoulders. "Father," Scorpius said quietly. Draco turned, his face momentarily lighting up with joy at seeing his son. "Scorpius, how was your journey? You look different." "I have something for you," Scorpius said, taking a small silver pensive from his bag. "Memories that change everything." Draco frowned. "What memories? Where did you get them?" "From a creature that shows alternative realities," Scorpius answered honestly. "Father, I saw what you could have been, all possible variants of your life." He set up the pensive on the table and carefully poured the silvery memories into it, which the Visispods had allowed him to take. "Look," Scorpius said gently. "Look and understand that the path you took, despite all its painful moments, was the best possible." Draco looked at his son for a long time, then at the pensive. Fear and curiosity fought in his eyes. "What if what I see is even worse than what I feel now? What if it's better?" Scorpius replied with a question to a question. Draco slowly approached the pensive and immersed his face in the silver surface of the memories. Scorpius waited, watching his father's motionless figure. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally Draco raised his head, his eyes filled with tears, but not of pain, of understanding. "My God," he whispered. "In one of those worlds, in one of them I killed Hermione with my own hands." "Yes," Scorpius confirmed quietly. "And in another you died young, never knowing true repentance. In a third you spent your life in prison. In a fourth you became even worse than Grandfather Lucius." Draco sat in an armchair, covering his face with his hands. "And that world where I was sorted into Gryffindor, there I was better from the very beginning, but never became as deep as you are now," Scorpius finished. "Father, that Draco avoided evil but never learned how strong good can be when it's born from repentance." Draco raised his head, looking at his son with new eyes. "You're saying that my mistakes, that all the pain I caused, made you a better person," Scorpius said firmly. "Didn't justify them, didn't wash them away, but taught you to value good in a way that people who never fell could never do." Silence filled the library. Father and son sat opposite each other, both burdened by the weight of understanding. "You know," Draco finally said, his voice quiet but firm, "yesterday I received a letter from Harry. He's inviting us to James Sirius's birthday." "And what did you reply?" "Nothing. As always." Draco paused. "But now I think I'll go. We'll go together." Scorpius smiled, the first genuine smile in many weeks. "Yes, Father. We'll go. And you know what else?" Draco stood up, his posture straightening. "I'm going to stop hiding from my past. It's part of me, part of who I am now. And if someone can't accept that, then that's their problem," Scorpius finished. Draco approached the window, but this time his gaze wasn't clouded with pain, but clear and determined. "Thank you, son," he said quietly, "for showing me the truth." "Thank you, Father," Scorpius replied, "for always fighting for the right to be better, even when it was hardest." That evening they sat together by the fireplace, reading. The atmosphere in the house had changed. The heavy burden of ages had finally shifted. Not disappeared, but became not chains, but a foundation, a basis for building something better. "Father," Scorpius said, putting down his book, "what if we created a foundation to help children from former Death Eater families, so they don't feel doomed to repeat their parents' mistakes?" Draco looked at his son with pride. "Wonderful idea. What do you think we should call it?" Scorpius thought. "New Paths," he said finally. "Because there's always another way. There's always a choice." "New Paths," Draco repeated, savoring the words. "Yes, that's perfect." Outside the window's November wind drove the last leaves, clearing the ground for new life. In the library of Malfoy Manor, father and son planned the future. A future built not on denying the past, but on accepting and transforming it. Scorpius never told his father again about the journey to the Carpathians or about the Visispods. Some secrets are better kept in the heart. But the lesson he had learned lived with him all his life. Sometimes the best gift we can give those we love is to help them understand that their path, despite all its troubles and mistakes, led them exactly where they needed to be. In a world where thousands of possibilities existed, where every choice spawned a new reality, Draco Malfoy had chosen the hardest path, the path of repentance, forgiveness, and redemption. And that's why he became not just a better person, but a true one. And Scorpius learned to value not only light, but also the shadows that made that light visible. For only those who had known darkness could truly appreciate the dawn. In a distant cave in the Carpathian Mountains, the Visispods curled up, sleeping a sleep that would last until another weary soul came with the question, what if? For the world is full of possibilities, and everyone deserves a chance to see what paths could have been theirs, not to regret the past, but to understand the value of what is.